Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sundance WarnerMedia Lodge. Thank you for joining the Family Style panel presented by Stage 13, a division of Warner Brothers. I'm Lawerence, Deputy Editor at The Wrap, and joining us on the panel today are Jim Lee, Publisher and Chief Creative Officer of DC, and from Family Style, Shari Scorca, Executive Producer and Vice President of Unscripted Content at Stage 13, Marie Jamora, Executive Producer and Director of Family Style, Phil Chung, Executive Producer and Creative Director, YOMYOMF, and Lana Mckissick, cast member and foodie Family Style. Welcome all. For our visually impaired audience, I'm Lawerence. I'm an Asian American male, and I haven't had a haircut in 3 months.
Next up, I'm Jim Lee. I was born in Korea. I'm Korean American. I look like someone who has a home gym, but never really uses the equipment. So imagine that. I'm in a black t-shirt here in my game room at home.
I'm Shari Scorca. I'm a mixture of many things, but I'm an Argentinian Italian woman with kind of big curly hair, if you can, and that's very fluffy to the touch.
Hi, I'm Marie Jamora. I was born in Manila, Philippines, and people say I look 12 years old.
My name is Phil Chung. I'm an Asian American male, specifically a Korean American male, and I guess you can picture me as a cross between Henry Golding, John Cho, and Jim Lee, but without the handsomeness or the charisma, and a buzz cut.
Hi, I'm Lana Mckissick. I am a half Japanese, half Caucasian female, and it's 88 degrees today in Los Angeles, but I'm inexplicably wearing a leather jacket.
Family Style is a digital short series with episodes available on stage13.com, Facebook, and YouTube, but it isn't your traditional short-form food show. Of course, it showcases the incredible and diverse Asian cuisines, chefs, and restaurants that you just saw, but it also explores how food and the traditions of food shape our culture today. So I wanted to start with you, Shari, and talk about how this show is different from the rest.
Well, this was a show that we've been circling for years before it actually got made. Phil Chung and I met in an office at Warner Brothers, and we're talking about, he brought this amazing deck full of really interesting Asian food stories. And we were talking about how there wasn't a show that felt like you were having dinner with friends, and that food is the way, like, your first introduction to a lot of cultures, and for some people, the beginning and end of their introduction to a culture. And instead of trying to teach people through an edutainment thing, what about learning about culture and food through like a conversation with friends? So that's why, how we started formulating what this show would become, and how we started casting for a foodie fam. And, we got people who weren't food experts. We're not talking about where you're sourcing mushrooms from, or going, to the sea to go find yourself the fresh fish. You're talking to somebody who's eating congee and saying, my grandmother made this for me as a child, and this is what the memory it brings back, and how different maybe recipe wise it was, and really giving it sort of a heart and straight to your stomach. It's not, again, there's enough shows with chefs really heading them up, and that gets, I think it goes over people's heads that don't cook or don't have access to these sort of elevated restaurants, in other parts of the country. But I think this really gave an entree to something a little bit different, and really made you feel like you could join the table.
Yeah. So season 2 kicked off with an episode themed Heroes, and there's no bigger name in the world of comic books than DC's Jim Lee. Let's take a look at his segment.
I was born in South Korea. I have very kind of dim memories of living in Seoul. We left when I was like 4.5 years old. When we flew over, it was a long flight from Seoul to the United States. I think I was kind of a picky eater as a young kid, and I didn't eat any of the airline food. We moved to Ohio. I was like the only Asian kid in the entire school. Moving to a new culture, a new country, I didn't speak any English. I didn't have any knowledge of American culture. Kind of experiencing all this Western food, and it was just, I couldn't handle it. Even I remember McDonald's hamburgers. This is before you can custom order the burgers, right? So they always came with ketchup, mustard, and pickles, and the pickles and mustard would make me like literally gag. I just ate a lot of very kind of vanilla food, right? Plain pasta noodles, cheese pizza. But at the same time, I saw my dad, and he was just, omnivore. He would just eat anything and everything. how he would just kind of inhale food and love it.
So, Jim, that was one of your earliest food memories, and how you experienced American fast food coming from Seoul. Do you still hate mustard and ketchup and pickles, or can you have those on your hamburgers?
No. I was inspired by my father, and through the magical process of aging, all my taste buds have changed, and I love all that stuff. Like, I have to have onions. Mustard is my go-to on all that stuff. So it's a complete, and that's why I don't obsess about my kids' eating habits, right? Because they tend to be kind of picky too. Because I know so much can change in your life. At this point, I've probably eaten anything and everything: fried sheep brain, chicken hearts. I tend to be pretty adventurous these days. So. It was just, but that was a shock to me at that time, just because everything was just so different and new.
Did your parents keep on cooking Korean food after you immigrated, or did you have to kind of adjust to the ingredients that you had in American supermarkets at the time?
Sure. No. They were. I grew up in the Midwest, Ohio and Missouri, and there was always some place where my mom found or foraged for Korean, ingredients. And I would say we ate mostly Korean food. Every now and then she might make spaghetti with meatballs or frozen pizza or something like that, but it's mostly Korean food. So that was kind of our secret kind of, communal experience. And then, but if we went out, of course, it was Western food. And I remember like the first sushi restaurant in St. Louis opened up in the 70s when I was like 12 years old. And I remember that, experiencing that for the first time. You just have to remember, like, Korean food was super exotic, super rare. Kimchi was something that you unleashed on people like mustard gas. It would just, people would have this very visceral physical reaction. They'd like run out of the room, like they were going to gag. And now you just see it sold in, Vons and your local grocery store. So it's interesting to see how it's moved into the mainstream and has become embraced by so many different people or kinds of people.
And do you still kind of eat a lot of Korean food nowadays, or do you kind of mix it up with your cuisines?
Yeah. So completely unrehearsed. I have this thing of kimchi right here. I had rice. I had rice and 된장찌개 for lunch. So what I do now during the pandemic is I will order like tons of Korean food and basically put in the fridge, and it will last me through a couple of different lunches and dinners. And it stores really well. Like a lot of other foods, like if you don't eat it right away in that 20-30 minute gap, it gets soggy or it just changes in its chemical nature. Korean food, rice and vegetables with meat, I find that it actually can last really well for a couple days and still taste just as good. Kind of warmed up days after the fact.
Yeah, families all actually visited a kimchi factory. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that you can actually keep kimchi at room temperature, and it actually gets even more funky and special. And as you said, kind of that unleashing of those smells. But it really is a wonderful dish from Korea. And one of the many things that we explored this season, what I liked about that segment that we had with you was that there was animation to tell the story. Obviously, we didn't have photos of you coming to Seoul and flying over, but that's one of the things that Family Style really does that's unique to the storytelling. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit with you, Phil, and also hear from Marie about that. Marie's husband is an animator on the show. So Phil, tell us a little bit about using art to kind of do flashbacks and lookbacks on the show.
Yeah, so Marie will talk a little bit more about Jason, who is her husband, also one of our EPs, as well as our animation director. But the idea for it came because one of the segments we talked about doing early on was the segment that Jim was on. It's a series called Growing Up Asian. And it just kind of came from like kind of what I'll call like Asian foodie Twitter, where, you see everyone talking about all those embarrassing stories about growing up Asian in American schools. And, you had to take certain types of foods that other people might have thought was weird or smelly. I mean, it's ironic that food is what's hip now, right? But when we were kids, that was the weird stuff, right? And so the idea was that we were going to interview celebrities like Jim Lee and have them share a story about food growing up as well. And, we didn't want it to just be kind of an interview because obviously, even if the story's interesting, visually that's not as interesting. And so when I found out that Jason, had this animation background and he was connected with the company that we use, Apartment D, who are fantastic. I mean, they did all the, most of the animation for the show, and they supervised all the animation. And so the first interview we did was with director John Chu, who Crazy Rich Asians at the time was coming out. And he shared a story about, he grew up in a Chinese, restaurant. His parents had one, and they still have one up in Palo Alto, which is an amazing place. If you're up there, you should go check it out. And them cooking, his parents cooking bao, which are dumplings, for him to take to school. And because they were smelling embarrassed, he would like throw them out. And so the first animation, I think, and Marie, you can talk about this more, they did this kind of clay animation, stop motion style, which I just thought was amazing. When I started seeing the initial sketches coming in and how great it was, we're all like, oh, this is something we have to do. We have to kind of make this a regular part of the show. And we're lucky that Jason and Apartment D were able to kind of accommodate that. So Marie, I don't know if you want to talk more about the process of that.
No, for sure. I think you've set up super well, because that's one of my favorites, is really the John M. Chu animation. And it was basically claymation, top shooter down on glass. And what I love about how Open Stage 13 is that every animated segment, we get to use a different animation medium, whether we're using clay, cardboard, paper. It really depends on the story. For example, with Jim, it was like a dream come true for everybody, obviously, because he's a hero growing up. But we also knew, because of his story, that we wanted to play with the comic book format and kind of have the story explode from the frames of a comic book, and use kind of the dot, the kind of the Lichtenstein type dot art, and play with that. And what I love about how we do it is that we usually interview these celebrities ahead of time, and we just ask so many questions. We talked to Jim for probably an hour, and Jim, you told us maybe like many stories from your childhood, and from that like wealth of information, Jason and I and the animators, we kind of attach ourselves to something in particular we think will be amazing to animate. And this is when he was talking about his dad, Matter Earlad, and also the food. And Jason talked about how this American fast food would be amazing as the enemy, the anti-heroes, and what would they look like if they were all beefed up and muscular pizza? It's just kind of amazing. And so the process, I think, is very, very fun, and one of my favorite parts about this show.
I think you could have done a whole. Oh, I was going to just add, I think you could do a whole show just about kimchi. I'll tell you one other anecdote. Like when I was in college, I was in a 7-man suite, and I came back and I opened the small fridge, and the kimchi was missing. Like, what? And my roommate threw it away, and so I dumpster dived to get the kimchi back out, and I was so pissed off. And that's I've only dumpster dived on 2 occasions in my life. One was for kimchi, and the other one was my comic books, right? So growing up, my parents didn't want me reading comic books. When I was a teenager, they just threw them away every now and then, and I'd have to dive back into the trash cans and forge them, pull them back out. And so it kind of shows your priorities, right? Comic books and kimchi. So.
Well, you just gave us a season 3 idea, so Marie, Phil, let's write that down. As
we can recreate the moment.
You should make a hero named Kimchi, and
Kimchi diver.
Maybe the power. Yeah, the power is just It's funny that you mentioned your school story, because you were raised in the Midwest. I was raised out here on the West Coast, and I think we all have similar stories where we were considered the others, and our food, which is an extension of our families and ourselves, was considered the others, and now it's very much, as we said, in the mainstream. And what was formerly maybe a source of shame for us is a source of pride for us now. And it's something that this show really does well to highlight. So I think that's a wonderful thing. Jim isn't the only member of the WarnerMedia family that Family Style highlighted. As Phil mentioned, we talked to the cast of Crazy Rich Asians, but this season we talked to a lot of different people, Chantal Thuy and Osric Chow from the Arrowverse, and also Shannon Lee from Cinemax's Warrior. Now, that's a show that's based on the concept of her father, the legendary Bruce Lee. Phil, talk about how that was, meeting Shannon and having that sit down with her and having her go through the memories that she had of her father, who is just this icon in the Asian American culture, but also pop culture as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I've known Shannon for actually many years. And the idea for Warrior, which is on HBO Max now, for anyone who has it, you can watch it there. Came because just a little bit of background. YOMYOMF, the company that I'm a part of, was founded by Justin Lin, who's the director of the Fast and Furious movies, Star Trek Beyond, a bunch of other things, and he's also the executive producer on Warrior as well. And kind of what came about was that Shannon had mentioned to us, to Justin, that she had found all these kind of handwritten or hand-typed, kind of notes from her father, Bruce Lee, about a show idea that he had pitched to Warner Brothers, which, some people say got stolen and became Kung Fu. But it was this idea of this, Chinese immigrant, who came to America in the late 1800s, and kind of the kind of journey that he goes on. And so, that's where Warrior came from, where it was from kind of those, I actually still have, it's funny, you actually if you read the notes, it actually sounds like Bruce Lee. He actually writes the way that he talks, so you can kind of like hear the rhythms and stuff. So it's a really fascinating doc, but it came from that. And I know, like, having talked to Shannon before, like, food was an important thing, for her father. Like, he really enjoyed food. And I think that's an aspect of Bruce Lee that we rarely hear about. Like, I didn't really hear much about that aspect of his life. So when we were ready to do second season, and I think at the time, the second season of Warrior was also going to premiere on Cinemax originally. I asked Shannon, like, hey, do you want to come on the show and talk about your father and kind of, his relation with food? And, and then I think Marie, you and Jason kind of got on the phone with her as well. And it turned out she had a wealth of stories, about her father, and food, even stuff that I didn't know. So it was really exciting to have her on there.
Yeah, she shared about her history, in Hong Kong and also in the States, and how her father really loved Chinese food. And when he had immigrated, he really missed that. So I think that's, another commonality that a lot of immigrant families have. And that's also why they go into the business of food, is to, do what they're familiar with and what they can share with the community. Lana, I want to turn to you because you had two really kind of fun shoots for season 2. The first was a buffet, something that I think we're all missing right now in this kind of post-pandemic world. But that was with Jimmy O Yang, and literally it was almost everything that you can imagine. Talk to us about shooting that scene and being able to try so many different cuisines from different Asian cultures and also some other cultures as well.
Yeah, it was so much fun getting to shoot in the buffet. Gilbert, who's another member of the Foodie fam, and I got to join Jimmy O Yang, and I had never been to a proper Chinese buffet, which I know is strange. I mean, I've been to buffets in my life, and maybe I'd gone when I was a kid or something, but I certainly hadn't experienced anything like that, which was just an insane amount of varied, delicious food. There was just you could get anything. It wasn't like a college dorm type buffet where it's like, do you want the pizza or the fries or the Greek day treat or whatever? It was just like, oh man, we just kept going back and going back, and there was more and more food. And some of it was more unique than I had tried in the past, i.e. chicken feet. I've eaten it now, and I'm not sure I'll have that particular food item again, but I was glad I tried it. I know a lot of people love it. And I did get to try things I didn't think I'd like the two of them pulled a fast one on me and gave me, what was that dessert called, Marie?
Durian. It was a durian pastry.
Durian, yeah.
Yes, durian. And they told me it was something else, thinking that I was going to freak out and hate it. And I actually really liked it. And they were like, what?
Well,
We're so perplexed by you.
We should explain that durian is a really stinky fruit. Like, it's, a lot of people really can't stand it. So, yeah.
Maybe
It
that's
smells
why
like
it was
feet.
okay. Because I couldn't smell it because it was baked into like a little thing. So if I had eaten it by itself, I might have been turned off as it reached my mouth, but I couldn't smell it at all. So I actually really, really enjoyed it. So it was so fun. Jimmy is hilarious. He was keeping us laughing the entire time, of course. Yeah, it was a blast. So I can't wait to go back one day.
Yeah, and of course everybody knows Jimmy from Silicon Valley, where he's just a hilarious character. And he, you're right. They try to pull a fast one on you, and you didn't fall for it. And again, durian is one of those foods like kimchi that people always think they know about, and until they actually try it, whether or not they like it or not, that's part of the experience. Is you have to kind of be adventurous and do it and try it. So that was a really kind of funny on camera moment. I want to talk about a more kind of formal sit down that you had at EPLP with Ross Butler. And what I thought was really interesting about this conversation is we've talked about, different types of cuisine. We've talked about Korean kimchi. That buffet that you went to was a Chinese buffet, but this was an episode focused specifically on fusion, and you're Hapa, as is Ross. And you guys had a really interesting conversation about growing up biracial. Tell us a little bit about, that conversation and trying fusion food along with that conversation.
Yeah, that conversation was so much fun. Along with Ross Butler, I was joined by Stacy, who's another member of the Foodie fam and who's also Hapa. So yeah, it's a rare time when three Hapas can sit down together and just talk about our unique experience, because it's very unique. I think a lot of the time you either are told you're not Asian enough or not white enough, and you kind of just laugh it off because what does that even mean? But it was really nice to have that heart to heart, and kind of bond over the weird questions you'd get growing up, like, what are you? Where are you from? But where are you from? These are things
Right.
we're very used to. I mean, people still ask me these questions now, less for sure. But yeah, that kind of thing you don't get to talk to very many people about that. So it was really enjoyable. And then to taste the food at EPLP was phenomenal. The dessert that we had is top 5 best things I've ever eaten in my entire life. Maybe top 3, maybe top 1. I don't know, but it was so good. I couldn't stop eating it. I loved it, and I really hope that, when things open up again, we get the chance to go back there, because it was really just the fusion of flavors, and it was just, I had never had anything like it. I was so blown away.
Yeah, I think that, as I said before, people tend to compartmentalize what Asian is. And I think that we are becoming a society that is increasingly multiracial. And, Korean food can have a Korean Italian fusion. You could have kimchi pasta, or you can have, a cold Thai, or Vietnamese French connection, and that's already kind of been historically established. But that type of fusion food is becoming increasingly popular as well. So it's always good to highlight the differences that are out in the in restaurants and cuisines. That leads me to my next question about diversity. And this crew is a very diverse crew. We're looking at 2 female EPs. We have hosts from a lot of different Asian backgrounds. I want to hear about how that diversity helped the production, because you are tackling a lot of different cultures, and how the expertise of the crew went beyond just their production expertise, but also their cultural expertise. Marie, why don't you talk a little bit about that, and how, having a diverse crew really helped, with the production and idea generation to execution?
I know, I love this question, because I think that the reason why we can have such amazing stories is because of the diversity of the crew. Phil brings in stories because from his culture, and also from Asian Twitter. But at the same time, me being Filipino from Asia, I also, and being a lover of food, cooking shows, I always would say, I would love to see this. I've never seen this before. And that's always a conversation we always have. Like, have you tried this cuisine before? And one of my favorite things that I wish we could do again is that we'd be at the office at Stage 13, and we'd all be eating the food that we want to feature, and kind of talking about what's new and why it's crazy that no one has ever talked about it before. So for example, one episode we had Sri Lankan cuisine, which is something I'd never had before in the prior to the show. And it was something that was the most spicy thing I've ever had in the history of my existence, to a point that it's traumatizing, but traumatizingly eye-opening. And another type of cuisine that I really uh, uh, sorry, I suddenly had a flashback to me kind of sweating while trying the food. But I think that another great thing is that on the set, when you have, one of the story editors is Asian American, he's Chinese American, and you have Phil, who's Korean American. You have, Shari and Marcel, who come from like Latino and other cultures, and Lana. I think we all bring something new to the table. One of our hosts this season, Parvesh China, he had a conversation with me and he said, Marie, all these shows show North Indian food. And I don't really see anything about South Indian food. So I would really love to have a segment that features that. So our final episode actually has a conversation with Parvesh and his friends from childhood with a South Asian meal, like a South Indian meal. So I think that that's something that I feel we'll never run out of stories because of the diversity of our crew and the openness of the people working on the show.
Just to add to that, I think that all of our support crew and our technical crew we had an Asian woman DP and audio team and, our PA, like it helps to, and I was talking to Lawerence about this before, it just helped, in practical sense, like, Ty, our PA, he spoke Korean, and it was helpful when we went to a Korean restaurant to be able to make those phone calls. Some of it was that practical, and others is just about, if you're telling an authentic story, and authentic is a word that gets thrown around a lot, it's nice that you have people to gut check, to add to the story, to help, and I thought that was so great for me as a viewer, because I watch, I'm a part of making the show, but I'm watching it as a viewer, and you can feel the realness behind these stories, and a lot of it comes from, like, it's not just the on-camera crew, although all of them are a big part. They're sort of writers on the show as well, because they bring their own stories to the table, but the people behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, I love how everybody on the show approaches every show with a sense of curiosity and discovery. And, Lana was talking a little bit about that in the buffet episode, but it's truly about trying different things and being open to different things, because that's ultimately, the way that you learn about the stories behind the foods. And you might not like necessarily how it tastes, and it might be so spicy that it blows your head off, but at least you tried it and you understand the story behind it. So that's really, really wonderful. The interesting about the show is we saw some of the segments that were produced before the pandemic. So Jim was clearly shot, before the pandemic hit, but there was a real pivot that happened to the entire, production, every production in Hollywood, from, TV shows to movie shows to movies. And I want to hear about how that shifted for you, because there was a specific moment, and Phil, if you could talk about this a little bit, when you guys realized that, hey, this is real, and we have to kind of shift gears. So Phil, can you talk about that moment that you guys realized that, there was going to be a real kind of change needed for the production?
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what day that was. We were shooting in the San Gabriel Valley, and like all of a sudden, I see everybody kind of looking at their phones, and like kind of whispering on the crew, and I'm all, what's going on? They're like, Tom Hanks has coronavirus, and like, I think it was that moment that it kind of like, because like we had already, been hearing that it was in the US and there were people who were infected. But I think it was that day where I remember we came back from the shoot and we all kind of reconvened in our office, and we really talked about, we had a shoot planned the next day. In fact, with the whole cast, the whole Foodie Fam cast, where we literally have everybody together in a restaurant, in a Toyota, car, driving there together in very close proximity. And we talked about, like, look, is this something that we can continue doing? Like, do we need to take a break? And ultimately, I think, we decided, obviously correctly, I think we need to kind of put the brakes on it, and kind of see what's going on. And then kind of the shutdown happened a couple of days after that anyways. And, it's just kind of funny looking back now, like, what is it, like, been 10 months? And to think that at the time, like, everyone was kind of like, we'll see you in 2 weeks when we're back from this.
Right.
And here we are 10 months later. So yeah, it was definitely, especially for a food show, where, like, there's no way around kind of that intimacy that you're going to have anyways, right? It's not like we were doing an interview show where you could have people far apart or do it remotely at the time. And the fact that we were also shooting, at Asian restaurants, in fact, some of them were already telling us that their business, was going down because, people thought you would get coronavirus if you went to Chinatown or, the San Gabriel Valley and went to kind of these Asian places. So yeah, it was really kind of, a surreal experience.
Yeah, I would definitely want to touch on the effect that the pandemic had on this very subject of the show, the restaurants. Even when you were shooting before the shutdown, you were already hearing back from a lot of restaurants that you were researching and filming at about the anti-Asian sentiment that was growing. We had our president talking a lot about the China virus rather than the coronavirus, and a lot of people putting blame on Asian proprietors, Asian restaurants, Asian communities. And the wonderful thing is that you guys were able to address that head on. And I'd love to hear about this Stage 13 Supports initiative that you guys did. One, to help combat that sentiment and that racism, but two, also to highlight these businesses that were really in need. Shari, can you talk a little bit about Stage 13 Supports and how that came about?
Well, we decided to mobilize our fan base on Facebook and really form this group, the Family Style Foodie Fam group on Facebook, and did a Stage 13 Supports campaign. And really, it was about collecting stories, and as we were all getting takeout, it was taking pictures and sharing everything that you were eating, just to say, like, don't you want to eat this? Go support your local restaurant. And we also utilize this as a way of to give back, quite literally, where we actually went to restaurants that we had us as guests to shoot, like a place called Bopo Mofo in the San Gabriel Valley that is a tea shop, and sort of they have cool snacks that are delicious. And we had them cook food, and we were able to get a donation from Warner Brothers to Bopo Mofo to cook food. So it benefited the restaurant. And then that food was then taken to give to charity. We gave that to some hospitals, some frontline workers. And we did the same thing with a restaurant called Bone Kettle in Pasadena that had provided food for our premiere party. And, we were able to, again, they're struggling restaurants, give them back financial, means, and then they were able to still pay that forward by giving it to an Asian youth center in San Gabriel that some people who were food insecure. So I think that and they get this amazing meal. So I think that was something that we've continued to do, and we are continuing to do. Like, if you go there now, we're continuing to post. We want to support. Somebody else who worked with us on season 1, it was the Stop By Cafe, a food truck that was having a lot of trouble during the shutdown, figuring it all out. And we actually, helped we helped them with their social media and helped them get out there. And through the campaign, they're still out in the streets, cooking good food for people, out of their food truck. And I think that it's not to pat ourselves on the back. It's just something like we feel like they welcomed us into their restaurants, and that's, their home, because these are mom and pop restaurants. They welcomed us and let us sit at their table to eat food. How can we give back to them? And we were able to do that through this program. And it was, it's really, it felt good, and it, continues to feel good as we still do that.
Yeah, Lana, you're a member of the Foodie Fam. How did it feel to kind of amplify and kind of evangelize these restaurants that have been really struggling, since the pandemic started?
It felt great. I honestly, for the first 6 months or so of the shutdown, I didn't order out once because we didn't have all the information, and I was like, I'm gonna just make the same food every day and just be safe and wipe everything down and not go out. So this kind of actually forced me to open up a little, because I was like, all right, well, now we know food's okay. Just wipe it down, wash your hands. And so, I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful that it was able to open the doors for people to experience some new restaurants that they maybe hadn't heard of. I went to a place I used to go to all the time called Tara's Himalayan Cuisine. And it's so delicious. I can't even tell you. It's in Culver City if you live in Los Angeles. But just to shine a light on smaller restaurants that have always had amazing quality food and amazing service and who are struggling now. It's, that was just one small thing that I was able to do, with just, shine a light on them. But Stage 13 and everyone was with providing meals for frontline workers, and then just giving these massive shout outs, giving a voice. And by creating that Facebook group that they created, a lot of individual people were cooking and putting, this is what I made today. And it created a whole other community of not just restaurants, but also just people in their homes saying, look, this is the like really cute things, or things that just visually were gorgeous, or you could tell it just tasted amazing. It created a whole bonding experience on top of also shining a light on struggling businesses. So I think it was such a great idea, and it's still continuing. People are still posting, like, this is what I made for my family on Friday, and people are still commenting, that looks awesome, I want to try it. I think that's really a beautiful gift that came from all of this.
Yeah, the Facebook group is Family Style Foodie Fam, and it is a very kind of positive and safe space. I think that, we've been in this, as you said, for 10 months, and I love to try new restaurants. I want to support my local restaurants, as I'm sure we all do, and this is a really good way to discover those and, share what your favorite dishes are, and, post some really Insta-worthy photos of those delicious dishes and share it with the rest of the community. So let's learn more about Stage 13 supports.
What's up, guys? It's Meili Tao, your donor princess. Shout out to Stage 13 for reaching out to small businesses at this time. On behalf of the Bone Kettle crew, very proud to partner with Stage 13 and the Family Style crew.
And we're here today at the Asian Youth Center.
And we're going to be providing 50 meals for the Asian youth today.
This morning we're getting ready for another delivery to Beverly Hospital. We had a large donation by Stage 13 Supports.
Bellissimo.
They wanted to support Asian-owned small businesses, and through us at Bopomofo Cafe, we were able to deliver them directly to the front line.
I wanted to give a shout out to one of my favorite restaurants in LA, Hara's Himalayan Cuisine, and it is so delicious.
One of my favorite restaurants based in Pasadena. It's a Japanese restaurant called Osawa's. Thank you for supporting small businesses, and thank you to all of the people who are out there working to provide us food, to provide us safety and health, and all those incredible things that you guys are doing. So thank you to everyone.
Whoa, our first online order!
That's dope.
I'll get a lot of this to go.
Shari, I want to talk about how much did you actually have done at that point before you had to stop production, and how did you kind of pivot to, knowing that you had, episodes to fill after that?
Well, I mean, we hadn't finished half the season of our original plans, I would say. But once we looked at the footage we did have, we always overshoot a bit, and our guests are always telling great stories. So instead of fitting them into shorter segments and going and doing more, we were able to let some of these things breathe. And we realized we had enough for, 6 episodes really. And as long as the animation came through, and we had to, talk to Jason and Marie about the plan for animation, because that really, that could continue in quarantine. Animators can work, in smaller teams or alone a lot of the time. So that worked. But then we were looking at the footage, and we figured we have to pivot. We watched, we took a break for a while to sort of regroup to see, because we really all did think we were going to go back to work, right? I think,
Right.
We all left our offices like it's, like a zombie movie where everything's left in place, and you eventually had to go back to get your stuff. I think that once we realized we weren't going back, and we had watched enough on television, all of the very quick turnaround sort of Zoom TV shows that were happening at the time, and sort of went with best practices and figured out what would work best and still feel like the spirit of the show. And one of the first things we shot was actually with Lana and Jimmy Wong about the to do a cooking segment, and we tried it out, and we said, this works, because it's about their personalities coming through. It's about that really cool story being told. And the food in that case was a little bit more secondary than their personalities, but I think that that's okay on the Zoom show. And we were able to make it happen and be able to complete 2 shows, in quarantine with distance, but able to still, recreate a family style meal. I mean, people were doing these Zoom happy hours. We did a Zoom meal with our, with our South Asian, friends. So it worked out really well with that segment as well.
Yeah, Lana, I want to hear about how it was, going from shooting in these restaurants and having these incredible chef-prepared meals to cooking your own food, via Zoom. How was that experience for you?
Oh man, huge letdown having to cook your own food after some of these amazing restaurants. Yeah, it's funny because I feel like we shot the EPLP episode right before the shutdown, if not a day or two, something like that. And then we were all scheduled to shoot together, and we all got a call. Hold on, we're gonna figure out if that's still happening. And then finally, we were told it wasn't gonna happen for the time being. And of course, it makes sense because, like Phil said, we were all gonna be in a car together. We were gonna be, putting food in each other's mouths like we had normally, just jokingly as friends, and that wouldn't have been the best idea. So I'm glad it didn't happen. But yeah, so they were really smart about how to make this work, because I think, in the end, the whole concept of family style is not just the food, but the appeal of the family environment, the friends and family gathering over food to talk and to connect. And so, like Shari said, the food might be secondary, but that's okay, because it kind of was the whole time. Even if we're focusing on food, we're really focusing on our experiences and life, and we're talking over the food. And so getting to cook with Jimmy, or bake is what I did with Jimmy Wong, was very fun. He has a whole cookbook full of recipes that are inspired by food from film and TV series. And so I made ambrosia squares based on the Percy Jackson series. Very fun, very delicious. I ate a lot of them, and I don't regret any of it, but I do wish that I could go back to occasionally, getting to eat some gourmet meals and hang out and chat with my friends in real life on family style. That I do miss.
Right. Yeah, but it also captured the reality of what everybody was in. Literally, everybody has been in this quarantine for months, and we've had to pivot and evolve. And, a lot of people are now cooking for themselves. It's been a shifting and evolving thing with all of these tiers and production requirements. So it was really great that you were able to pivot. And I think the season finale really highlighted that, because it was the South Asian meal that Marie talked about a little bit earlier, but it was one where actually being remote lent itself to the production, and you were able to pull in people that weren't necessarily in LA to film this really interesting family style meal highlighting different Indian cuisines, not just, as you said, Parvesh would focus on the Northern India, but bring in different parts of Indian cuisine. Talk a little bit about that production and how that came together, Shari.
I may toss this one over to Phil as well. I just think Parvesh,
Sure.
we were talking with him about, we were supposed to go to a festival, just by the way, with Parvesh. That was actually happening that following weekend. All the things we were supposed to do. But he was talking about growing up in Chicago with this really cool group of, mostly comedians, but, actors and actresses. And a couple were one of them was actually in Chicago at the time. So they had this sort of, similar memory to take in the area of town where you could go eat Indian food. And it was nice for them to reminisce, because they kind of grew up together in the business and grew up together sort of literally and know each other's families. And it got to the point where I felt like it was really touching. And, you really put there was no guard up anymore. I think sometimes when we're on Zoom, you're either a little bit more self-conscious because you're staring at yourself the whole time, or you become less so because you're in your home and you get to you feel this comfort level. You don't have an entire crew listening to you. You're really just talking to your friends at that point. Phil, I know that you helped put this together with Parvesh as well.
Yeah, I mean, like Shari said, when the kind of the COVID shutdown happened, we had filmed some segments, but one of the things that we weren't able to shoot was anything that had to do with like South Asian cuisine, or Indian cuisine. And Parvesh, who's one of our Foodie Fam hosts, he is Indian American. And, we just thought that was really important to represent. So we were looking for something, that we could do over Zoom. And, I talked to Parvesh, and just told him like, hey, is there anything that we can do where, yes, we can share a virtual meal, but, not just kind of share a meal, but is there another angle or another kind of way into kind of doing something that we've all been doing now? And he's the one who kind of came up with the idea that, well, there's a group of South Asian actors and all of us came out of Chicago. Like we all kind of came up together, people like Danny Pudi from Community, Sonal Shah, who's on Scrubs. And, he said, why don't we get that gang back together? And it really kind of worked out well, because what it did for the segment, if you watch it, like Lawerence said, it's the last episode of the season. It really had, even though it was a fun conversation and it was old friends, kind of connecting, it also had this kind of, what I call like a melancholy COVID feel, right? The fact that, we're all kind of separated and how this group of friends who actually are very close, but are not able to kind of see each other in person, the way that they're kind of connecting again, and to see that dynamic played, I thought it was a really kind of, emotional way to end the season. In fact, I would say like I wasn't expecting that when we said about doing the piece, that it would be, such an emotional kind of segment. I knew they were all funny. I thought it would be fun, and I wasn't worried about that, but I wasn't expecting that other layer that just kind of came because we've been separated from the people that we love for 8 months at that time.
And so many of their memories were tied to food. And that was what was really kind of wonderful about it. I mean, Danny was talking about his late father and how they would always go to the same restaurant when he was in Chicago. And you were right. There was a little bit of a melancholy feel to it, but also I think a sense of community and sharing and feeling comfortable, in the space. I mean, so many of us now share on Zoom, but if you really think about it, the dining table is where families share their stories, at that, whether it's, 7 o'clock at night, everybody come and let's go eat, that's where a lot of these families, traditions are told and these stories are told. So I think it was a really wonderful way to end the season and highlight not only kind of a different cuisine, as you said, the South Asian cuisine, but also the stories of these 5 very disparate people who all may be from the same area and all working in the same industry, but have very, very different stories. So that's a lovely sentiment. I want to end on a reflective note, and it's really nice that we have Jim here because Jim is a storyteller by nature. You are an artist, a visual storyteller, but also, a storyteller of cultures and different perspectives. Jim, how did it feel to kind of have your story be told on the show, and why are these types of shows important in your opinion?
Wow. Well, I was very honored to be profiled. Certainly it made me reflect upon my childhood more and just why I am the way I am, and dealing with issues that you may not even know that you had at the time, right? Growing up as an outsider, we moved to the U.S. when I was 5. I didn't speak any English, like you saw in the segment, and my whole history, certainly as a kid and adolescence, was about: do I fit in? How do I fit in? And in some ways, I look at my journey as an artist as sort of being helped by that, right? Because I was always observing and watching and taking in how people acted and posed and the gestures they used, the cultural ways that people interacted and even ate, right? Outside cutlery first, moving in, just, pulling the spoon towards you, like all these weird things that I just never really understood as a kid. And so all those things, being observational is something that I think, is something you infuse in your storytelling to make it feel quote unquote authentic and really pull from your own personal experience. And so I do feel like it did help me on my journey as an artist. And, I just think in general, like, and even more so now, everyone understands the importance of finding people that can tell these stories and tell them in ways that really resonate, with the people they're intended to reach. And, in the comic book business, I mean, just as a quick aside, diversity is something that we've always strived for. And it's interesting to kind of see how it's changed over the decades. And it used to just be acknowledgement that there were superheroes in other countries, and we'd give them names like Blitzkrieg, which is a horrible name for a character in a post-World War II era to adopt, but it was something that people could attach to. And then the move to maybe flesh out these characters so then they're not just stereotypes or just names of other cultures or cultural, identifiers. And then it was about finding people from those cultures and these countries to tell those stories and bringing them sort of in the community. And so you just see how it's all kind of tied together, these cultural moments, how we interact, and how all that infuses and drives and motivates our storytelling. So it's something that, I feel like we're at a critical point in entertainment where things have been changing more quickly than ever before. And it's something that we are really embracing, and I'm excited for the future of everything that we're doing at DC.
That's a really beautiful sentiment. Shari, talk about looking back on this season and all of the challenges that you went through. What's your takeaway, and what do you think is what are you most proud of, I guess?
I'm just most proud of how resilient the team was, how excited everyone was to do whatever was necessary to finish the season, and how excited the team was. Special shout out to Jason, for really that animation to get it done in time and to really get it out. And I think that everyone just gave their all and was excited. I mean, Lana was her own DP, and I think that an audio person and everything, set designer.
I'm so sorry about that.
and I think that made for, I think we all, are better for it. Like, and I think that, the things that you learn is how you can all come together as a team. And I thought we did a really great job. And I think that I'm more excited than ever to do a third season, with the team. Like I really, fingers crossed we'll be able to go into production in the near future. And I feel like we can sort of utilize some of the tools we learned in Distant. I mean, I definitely hope we can get around a real table, but I do think that there are like some of the tools of being able to connect with people far away, I think was, we learned that actually did create a really heartfelt moment regardless of the distance. And I think maybe we can bring that into how we approach the next season.
Yeah, the challenges of the season also created a lot of opportunities, and it'll be really interesting to see how you take everything that you've learned, whether it's about food or resilience or even production techniques, and move forward with that. So I want to thank everybody for joining our panel today. Remember that Family Style can be seen at stage13.com, Facebook, and YouTube, and I want to wish everybody the best. Thank you, guys.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Awesome being on.